Witamy Państwa bardzo.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Robert Kozielski. I am an employee of the management faculty at the University of Łódź. I'm the vice rector of our university. And I would like to say hello to Janina Ochojska, to whom I sent a lot of warm energy. I was asked by her to find someone else to replace her during today's panel. I am honored to facilitate today's meeting, the meeting with somebody who is very special. She's involved in lots of unique projects. So I'd like to introduce Alexandra Vishnievska. I have known Alexandra for quite a while. Please allow me that we will be referring by our first names. So this relation will be more emotional, more personal, and of course it will be full of good energy. So probably the families are watching the panel, and you probably have learned about Ola's achievements, but she has achieved so much that it's not just a matter of one story. It's a lot of stories. So 5 or 6 years ago, Ola started to be known in the social and humanitarian circles. So her initial work has raised a lot of emotions. She was helping refugees who were reaching Greece, the Mediterranean Sea. She was also working for the Moria camp. She was also working for the United Nations in Turkey and in Syria. So she's been operating in many different fields which are really amazing. Her family are worried about her, of course. Now she is the head of the Humanitarian Mission in Yemen. There are lots of interesting topics to cover, so I'm not going to extend the introduction. So the topic of the panel is the humanitarianism in the age of the pandemic. So we will address three perspectives. The first one is the perspective of humanitarianism and perceiving it from the current perspective. We would like to answer the question whether the contemporary humanitarianism is the same approach that was taken 200 or 300 years ago. This is when it all started. And also we would like to consider the impact of the pandemics on the humanitarianism. One day the pandemics will disappear, and we will have to answer the question how it has impacted the humanitarianism. And the third question is whether Alexandra is a unique exception, or whether maybe she's just a representative of the new generation that will be changing this world into a better place. We will be discussing the humanitarianism in the age of the pandemics, looking at these three perspectives. Ola, probably 12 months ago, you took part in the Freedom Games, and you were telling the audience about the values that have made you become involved in the work in Yemen. You were also presenting your plans. You were saying why you going to these places, what are the plans. So tell us about the plans. To what extent have you achieved them? What's the current situation, and how do you assess these last 12 months of your unique work for people who have been left alone in the environment of war? It's a great privilege to speak with you. You have been an authority for me for many years. So 12 months ago, I was speaking to you in Atlas Arena in Łódź, just before I left for Yemen. And I must admit that Yemen is not the first zone of war I have witnessed. But when I went there, what we have seen as the Polish humanitarian action, the scale of suffering, the scale of damages of the civilian infrastructure, the scale of failures in terms of striking peace, and there are so many fractions, so many groups that are fighting to accomplish some financial gains. So some 230,000 people have been killed as a result of war activities. Also, many people died because of bombings. 85,000 of children were also killed. Actually, they died of hunger, they starved, and there are everyday attacks against civilians. So this is slaughter. So what I have seen was just dramatic. So in Yemen, we are witnessing the biggest humanitarian crisis in the world. So lots of people need humanitarian aid to survive. And despite of this fact, the world doesn't notice the war in Yemen to such an extent that it notices the war in Syria, for instance. Foreign media are not that much interested in Yemen. So the Arabic states, Saudi Arabia, Iran are fighting for the influences in the region using not direct support of the Western European states. So when we went there, we were really shocked. It was like a Pandora box. And the mission of the Polish humanitarian action was developed in Yemen. So first, we wanted to conduct humanitarian aid activities. That was the mission. So we reconstructed water connections, we supplied water, we were reaching schools near the front line, and there are 36 such front lines in Yemen. We were developing a water network in the country where there's the pandemic of cholera. In Yemen, actually, there's the biggest cholera pandemic that has ever been registered in the world. And we were doing it before coronavirus pandemic started. And when the coronavirus started, we had to forget all the plans. We had to completely change our plans. So this means that you've become involved in medical aid in Yemen? Yes, exactly. So when we started receiving the first information about the pandemic, actually we had some forecast that 83% of the population will become infected, 1 million people will require medical aid, and these people will not receive this aid because 50% of the hospitals in Yemen were damaged. For the past 2 years, physicians and nurses didn't get any remuneration, so we knew that the medical service there will not be able to take part in the counteracting of the virus. And we knew that the fighting fractions will make use of the pandemic for the political reasons. So the source of political manipulation. And what we were shocked of was when pandemic started, humanitarian humanitarian aid workers, they had a lot of dilemmas to face. So lots of air transport, road transport was cut off, and the political situation in Yemen was deteriorating, so now it's helpless. So we were thinking whether we should be evacuated from that country or not. And so before our activities was a drop in the sea of needs, and then we saw that the UN people were leaving Yemen, so plane by plane were leaving, and maybe some 70 humanitarian workers stayed in Yemen, and so many people were in need. So I thought this is really helpless situation, but I still decided to stay because the Polish humanitarian action was trying to convince me that I should leave because of my safety, but still, I decided to stay to help people. So then we decided that we should redirect our assistance from hygiene-related actions to medical actions. So we recruited physicians, nurses, pharmacists. We supplied pharmacists. We reconstructed a clinic, and some 1,000 appointments are made every month. There is one maternity ward. And we are supporting 6 more clinics together with Caritas Polska. We received a significant financial aid from Caritas Polska, and we are planning to open another 4 clinics. So for a year, the mission in Yemen will support 230,000 people. So this is a realistic aid. So and we look at the scale of the problem, is still not meaningful. I wanted to ask you about some specific results, but you have mentioned them. It's very important because when you're looking at this size of a problem, it's incredible that you are successful. 230,000 people. This is a big group. So please tell me. Probably your stay can be subdivided into 2 periods, before the pandemic and after the pandemic has started. So have you noticed any bigger changes in the behaviors of people when pandemic started to be a real threat? Or maybe these people are so much frightened of war, and on daily basis that they are afraid that they will die, that the pandemic has not changed their way of thinking about solidarity, about being more sensitive towards other people. Both the residents and the institutions, humanitarian institutions. But you have really partly answered these questions, that there are not that many institutions in Yemen. Most of the institutions have evacuated their employees from Yemen. It's you and some other institutions?
Przyznam szczerze, że w Jemenie widać było.
Honestly speaking, among the inhabitants of Yemen, we could see panic and fear, and people who were tired with the conflict. They could see that such developed economies as Italy and the UK are not able to deal with the burden for the healthcare service. We recently talked about situations when people had to play the god in Polish hospitals. In Yemen, these are the choices that you make on the daily basis. So the choices not to which hospital to go, but when they will die. When I was in Poland, thinking about how to survive lockdown, not diminishing the efforts of Polish physicians and nurses, the scale in Yemen is so big that people don't know when they are going to eat another meal. People don't have access to potable water, so they are wondering when they are going to drink, and not how to wash their hands. We live in a kind of a bubble, so we have to remember that there is a cause and effect relationships. We have to remember that the isolation is artificial. Sooner or later, it will strike us. The pandemic is like a dance macabre, dealing with death. The problems of Yemen or Poland seem similar. The suffering, the death applies to everybody. This is the opportunity for us as the international society, international community, building this sense of community. I'm terribly sorry, but I cannot hear the speaker. We do have some technical problems. I do believe that your experiences are deep and traumatic. But can you say, when we use such pathetic, such big words, because humanitarianism is such a notion, such a term, what is it for you? What does it mean for you? And whether this traditional approach, thinking about humanitarianism in a much diversified time, when the pandemics only highlighted certain problems, we live in good conditions in Europe, and the pandemic, it trembled our foundation. But where you are, the survival of every single day is a problem for the people. It is not only a matter of access to food, to water, but the problem of medical care, of everyday life. This can be an issue of brutal aggression because somebody might come and kill you. I know that you have had such experiences, seeing it directly. What is humanitarianism for you? Because we teach it in universities, but is it something that applies to modern reality, or should we take a different approach? I think that humanitarianism is a universal notion. It is an attempt to relieve human suffering wherever we find it, and this remains. However, I think the theory behind humanitarianism and the tools that humanitarians have, as well as the compass of humanitarian actions, has to be redefined. It is much different than during the First or Second World War. The tools available for us need to be reformed. The two key tools which we use while regulating the humanitarian theory is international humanitarian law, which was established in 1859. Henri Dunant saw a battle in front of his house, and he inspired the convention, establishing the rules of the war. Humanitarians, hospitals, civilians must not be damaged. They are protected, but it is not respected. The compass of humanitarianism is neutrality, impartiality, independence, and being apolitical. These values often help us reach the populations which suffer most. Consequently, the lack of a reflection on the values, and because the UN systems are built and based on these values, the greatest homicides in Srebrenica and Rwanda, we allowed it by treating these values as a sacred thing and not as a basis which can be undermined under extreme conditions. There was the Srebrenica homicide. UN, which comes, sees the Bosnians surrounded by Serbs. They were begging not to leave them. And UN put its flag and said, "Okay, we can make you safe, but you have to give back your arms." And
Siła nazistowska wtedy była to to był siła holenderska. To nic nie zrobiła.
they didn't do anything
Neutralność polityczną.
due to political neutrality. The Serbs used 30,000 liters of fuel from UN's vehicles to fuel bulldozers that were digging mass graves. We know what happened in Rwanda, but what happened afterwards is just a tragedy. We did not stop murdering. The UN was evacuating, and when the homicide was over, the humanitarian society woke up, finally willing to do something. Then we had the case in Congo where refugees from Rwanda were escaping. In the majority, they were Hutu. In the camps established by the society providing the healthcare service, in revenge for a lack of action in Rwanda, the units were planning subsequent attacks coming back to Rwanda and were coming back with the loot. It continued until Robert Kwane came back from Rwanda and said, "You either close it or everybody will be killed." So I talk about such calamities, such disasters. Our best tools include UN, but these tools are not sufficient and they need to be reformed. Many people complain about the UN, but in my opinion, we owe a lot to them. They assisted in peaceful election in many countries. But even if if we consider that we have this General Assembly and everybody has the same right of vote, the fact that we can sit together instead of bombarding one another is a great value. However, the UN, which originally could use its military force, has never been completed or implemented. There is the Council of the UNs, which were the ones that won the Second World War. They have the right to veto. The UN can theoretically have two types of military interventions: peacekeeping mission and peace enforcement. And it has never happened. It is important to remember that we, as humanitarians from the UN, from the Polish Humanitarian Action, need to remember what our work is about. We put bandage on the wounds which are bleeding. We fight with symptoms and not with the causes. Every humanitarian crisis is a political crisis. Very often, humanitarians turn the responsibility from the entities which should be responsible. We have heard from the author of the Caravans of Crisis. She says that under extreme conditions, the humanitarian work is limited to distributing sandwiches in front of Auschwitz gates. We are not an antidote. We are the machine which supports the dying body, and we do everything to support it, but the solutions are somewhere else. Well, I definitely have to ask the question I'm going to ask. What you say is very important, and you present a holistic, a systemic approach. Despite the fact our families have known one another for a long time. But when back in 2015 I had the opportunity to meet your parents, we have the habit to meet 2 days before Christmas Eve. You told us a story that you shared in many other places, how you were saving the refugees coming to the border of Greece. One of the boats was not able to reach it, and one of the mothers threw a baby towards you, and you saved the baby. So you save every single life. Every life is important for us all, but you also take a holistic, a systemic approach to humanitarianism, to humanitarian values. But I have to ask the following question. I think that those people who are watching us ask the same questions. Why don't you do it in Poland? Why do you do it in so many dangerous areas? Why do you put your life at risk in such an extreme way? Are there no such areas in Poland which require your involvement?
Obszarów jest bardzo wiele.
I think that there are already people who are helping in Poland. You are here, for instance. I know that you take part in the foundation, or I cooperate with the foundation that supports Children's Home. So the question is, what is an alternative? To provide humanitarian aids in the world. I know that many societies have broken down and the most complex political problems result in the problems. So as long as I've got energy, if I am physically strong, I still have energy and strength. And when I'm looking at Poland, I am thinking a lot about Poland. I dream of being in Poland when I am in Yemen. I'm always trying to perceive it in a very practical way. But we have to work. And each one of us has some mechanisms which psychologically, mentally allow us to survive. So it may sound very romantically, but I always carry a volume of poems by Kamil Baczyński. So I'm thinking of the stars that are above Warsaw, and I'm doing it for Poland. The flag of the Polish humanitarian action is in Yemen, and Yemenis children are born. They otherwise, if not our help, these children would have died. So, if the hands of these young people can work, even if they are hurt, they are helpful. So I transmit this goodwill of Polish men and women. I also think that our society is very polarized. Problems in Poland cannot be ignored. We are the society where many people are so confused and lost. Many members of the government have become lost. We can see people who are confusing some terms. They are using political manipulation. So, for example, we are confusing fascism with patriotism, hatred with defense of Poland. So it's very important that the society has such people as Irena Sendler, Janusz Korczak, or Janina Ochojska. So we need the people who can attract the masses. Masses who seem to be neutral, but we have to attract these masses to build the Polish society based on the foundation of good and values. It sounds idealistic, but we have to practice it in real, and young people have to be a part of this transformation. I'm afraid I cannot hear the speaker. It all sounds great, but the price you are paying is very high. Isn't it too high? And it's high in two dimensions. Probably not many people know, but it's worth emphasizing that recently you were very close to death because you had malaria. And the helplessness of people who love you was incredible. Thank God you are all right. We are in a different world. You came back to Poland. You will stay here for a while, but at least we are happy to be able to be with you. There's also another dimension. You are very close to death on a daily basis. So you will have to, your future in a way will be hurt. Of course, there will be some scars forming, but the cost you are paying is very high. Aren't you afraid about your life? Aren't you afraid that your future is quite uncertain because of the things you are doing today?
Więc to prawda, że zawód pracownika humanitarnego
Being a humanitarian worker, this is a job where a risk is inherent.
najbardziej niebezpieczne
So
zawody
this is one of the 5 most dangerous jobs in the world.
natomiast jest
So
zawodem w ciągu kilku
workers and lumberjacks are among these professions. So within the past 5 years,
mojego czasu w tym sektorze już mam
I've been working in the sector. It's not a very long time, but I've got friends I had friends who died, so they paid the highest cost, and they shouldn't have paid this cost.
i tak przyznam szczerze,
I must say
który rozmawiamy teraz tak
that,
w rodzinnym
well, again, I'm back in Poland. I'm in my family home. I've got access to internet. I had a warm shower this morning. I had a good night's sleep. So there were no explosions.
albo jakichś nalotych katiuszek czy AK-47, to się zdarza się
It doesn't happen very often that I don't have these fears and that such luxurious conditions are available.
na jednej płaszczyźnie, na jednym świecie. Natomiast mam wrażenie, że
I think, of course, sometimes I'm afraid, but I think that my hope is greater than my fear.
ja mam wrażenie, jakby chciałam
And
wierzyć,
I think I would like to believe that the choices we are making
z innymi humanitarystami, tak, to są wybory, które
among our humanitarian circles, they are clear choices. Very often we have to pay personal price, and sometimes we have to take part in the fight that is grander, greater than our lives. So what I am doing is not really very important.
że mimo tego, że staram się ratować bliskie
So I'm trying to save human lives, but when I look at the scale of the problems, it's not significant.
scena z książki Kurde Wolne Butle.
There is a book called The Cat's Cradle, where somebody enters the NASA building and he meets a cleaner, and he's asking this person, "What are you doing?" And this person says, "Well, can't you see what I'm doing? I am helping somebody to go to the moon." So I think that the humanitarian workers are the people who are doing their best to take some of this suffering from other people. This fight is incredible.
Jesteśmy takimi Don Quixotami, które
We are like Don Quixote, who are going from one windmill to another.
chciałabym wierzyć, że to ma sens.
And I'd like to believe that it makes sense, but there are moments when sometimes we have to make this decision. Sometimes we witness specific situations, and it would be a betrayal if
Poświęcili
we do not sacrifice our energy to defend the people who are weaker.
się zdarzają.
So I have experienced such moments. Many of us have experienced them. I'm afraid I cannot hear. Oh, okay.
Widzą przez słuchacze pytania.
Another question. You are a very strong person. You are also very much aware of what you want to do and how you want to do this. I think that pictures are most communicative. And I don't want to shake the audience in terms of the challenges for humanitarian workers. And also some pictures concerning mutual aid, body aid. So could you describe us two pictures? The most difficult picture, the most difficult for you, and the nicest, the most pleasant picture for you. So when you go to sleep, you would prefer to see this nice picture. So just two pictures, if you could describe them.
Coś z moich bardzo z Jemenu, czy z moich ostatnich
So maybe the latest experience from maybe Yemen or maybe from the Greek islands. So let's get back to Europe. This is where we could see the most drastic things. But in Yemen, there are crimes against mankind, against civilians. It's on daily basis.
To jest jedna z wielu takich sytuacji.
And this is one of many situations of this type. This is when the humanitarian workers, especially the ones who document the crimes. So there was a bombing. There was an explosion of a school bus,
Fragmenty, tak,
and fragments
ciał,
of children's bodies were just piled,
rodziny przyszły
and families came to identify the bodies.
i to już zostało mi opowiedziane, ale
And it was really terrible for me. So and what happened? The family started to argue about hands or legs. They were saying who is the owner of these fragments.
drugą taką sytuacją, którą
Another situation which provides me with hope, which is beautiful, a situation from Greece.
pracowałam jeszcze jako wolontariuszka,
So I was working there as a voluntary in the Aegean Sea, Mediterranean Sea. So it wasn't the European Union authorities were accusing us that we were helping
prawo morskie, czyli
criminals. We were saving boats, people who were on the boats. And I remember that after the first night where we managed to rescue 4 boats, in total 120 people, and 17 people drowned. And then I came back to the camp. I was very tired. I was wet.
afgańskim wzgórzu,
And I sat down on a hill near Moria camp
które uczyły się o pomoc.
with refugees from Syria. And I sat down there and I was looking at the hopeless landscape, people who were freezing to death just in front of the border of the European Union, barbed wire, army, policemen. And I saw a little girl who came to me. She was Syrian. She was wearing a pink jacket. She had blonde hair, blue eyes. She looked like a European. So she came to me and she started playing with me. She had a toy. Okay, she was making bubbles. So bubbles. It was Christmas time. I'm not a believer, but I remember that when I saw the Syrian girl who led the war zone, she covered the sea, deadly sea. She crossed through the barbed wires, and now she's playing in this camp of refugees. So to me, it was a symbol of life and a symbol of huge strength and energy of people, of her mother probably. So that's a good memory, but we mustn't glorify the war. The war is cruel. It's nasty. It has nothing to do with movies with John Wayne or Brad Pitt.
Natomiast warto pamiętać o takich momentach, które są właśnie piękne w poezji pracowniczej.
But it's good to remember such pictures because it reminds us who we are. Thanks to such pictures we can develop.
Mistrza Adama Zagajewskiego, który był
And Adam Zagajewski poem, he was the guest yesterday, so I would like to tell you about a poem I often remember as
Spróbuj odkrywać określony świat.
try to take care of the hard word. Have you seen the refugees who were going to nowhere? Have you heard prosecutors who were singing?
A liście wiruje nad gwizdami ziemi.
Have you been to the park where the leaves are flying? Try to tell me about the hard word
Biegać z niego zobaczy.
and fight for this word. I'm afraid I cannot hear the speaker. One more question to sum up. We were often talking about this. We even have different opinions. I would love to believe. I have some evidence for this. I am a researcher, so the research is the basis for my reasoning. Could you agree with the thesis that you are not an exception? You are a representative of the generation that will change the world, the generation of values. Scientists often refer to millennials as very practical generation without any ideas. But I think that the last weeks also in Poland showed, and the evidence you've been presenting today, when you're telling us what you do, how you do it, you provide us with hope. You provide us with the hope that the generation that was brought up in the free Poland will be a completely new generation. Do you think you are a representative of the generation, or are you an exception? I think that these are big words. I think that maybe one day I will deserve this praise.
Patrzę nieco bardziej chłodno na nasze pokolenie niż patrzysz ty.
I am more reserved when I assess today's generation. I know that you are very hopeful towards the generation. I know that it's important for you in your academic research, but I know that you've got so much hope for this generation. You've got more hope than we have.
Bardzo ci jesteśmy winni.
So thank you very much for this.
Myślę, że widzę w moim pokoleniu
I think that I perceive this generation as the generation with the characteristics such as conformism. But I think for the first time we've got some tools that were not available to our fathers and grandfathers. So we were born in the free Poland. We are more authentic, and we will not allow the government to rule us. And you could see it within the past few weeks in Poland. And I hope that thousands of people in Poland who have open hearts, who wants to do social work, these people will learn how to think in a process-based manner. We will think how to build institutions, organizations, how to develop systems that will promote some ideas, and we will build a very strong civil societies that will defend the values in future. But we will see how it will happen. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming to Poland. Thank you for the meeting. Thank you for telling us what you do. I have 3 conclusions from our meeting. I think that they will sum up this panel. So probably the world needs a new humanitarianism. We need new institutions, and you will get the tools to the generation that will allow us to make sure that we live in a better world. Thank you.